Snow falls gently outside as a 62-year-old woman stands alone on a sidewalk, suitcase beside her, tears freezing on her cheeks as she watches a door slam shut. The Christmas wreath still hangs, mocking the holiday spirit that should have filled this day. After 34 years of raising my son, after working night shifts and double shifts to give him everything, after helping him buy that beautiful house he just threw me out of, he didn't know one crucial thing. I still legally owned it all, and I was about to teach him the hardest lesson a mother ever could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd spend Christmas night in a hotel room, alone, with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase and the clothes on my back. But there I was, Eleanor Mitchell, Ellie to my friends, staring at the ceiling as holiday music played faintly through the wall from the neighboring room. Just hours earlier, I'd been preparing Christmas dinner in my son's kitchen. The same kitchen I'd helped him design when he bought the house 5 years ago. The same kitchen where I'd taught him to make his first grilled cheese sandwich when he was barely tall enough to reach the counter. My hands still smelled of rosemary and sage from the turkey I'd been seasoning when everything fell apart. "Mom, we need to talk," James said, his voice unusually flat as he pulled me away from the stove. Vanessa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her sleeve. Their daughter Sophie had been sent upstairs to play with her new Christmas gifts, already a bad sign. They guided me to the dining room table, the one I'd helped them pick out at an estate sale, and refinished myself over the course of 3 weekends. James cleared his throat while Vanessa stared at her phone, barely present. "We've been thinking," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's time for you to find your own place." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I have my own place. I've been staying in the guest room since I retired, just like we planned." "That was supposed to be temporary, Mom. It's been 8 months. "James, we agreed I'd help with Sophie, while you and Vanessa worked. You said having me here would save you money on childcare and—" I trailed off as I saw their expressions. "The thing is," Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, "we're expecting again. We'll need the room for the nursery. But there's the office upstairs that you barely use." "Mom," James cut me off sharply, "this isn't a negotiation. We need our space back. We need to be a family." The words hit like a physical blow. We need to be a family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if I was an intruder. But where would I go? "I sold my condo to help with your down payment on this house." My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "You've been a nurse for 40 years, James said, his tone businesslike, reminding me of when he spoke to clients at his financial advisory firm. "You must have savings, a pension. It's not our fault if you didn't plan properly." I stared at my son, barely recognizing him. The boy who once cried when I worked double shifts, who begged me to come home early because he missed me too much. The boy who promised when he grew up, he'd buy me a big house where we could always be together. "I put most of my savings into helping you buy this house," I said quietly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Here we go again with the guilt trip. James told me you'd do this." "Do what? State a fact?" My voice trembled with emotion. "I put $120,000 toward your down payment. That was most of what I had left after paying for your college, James." "Nobody asked you to do that," James snapped. "That was your choice." I felt like I'd been slapped. "You absolutely did ask me. You and Vanessa came to me saying you'd found your dream home but couldn't quite afford it. You literally said, 'Mom, we need your help or we'll lose it.' Well, we would have figured something out eventually," Vanessa muttered. "The point is," James continued, "we need you out by New Year's. We've already hired a designer to convert the room, and the contractor starts January 2nd. "A week? You're giving me a week to find somewhere to live?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's Christmas, James. Where am I supposed to go?" There's a nice retirement community on the other side of town, Vanessa offered, as if she was being helpful. Patricia's aunt lives there. She says they sometimes have short-term rentals available. Patricia was Vanessa's mother, a woman who'd made it clear from day one that she found me lacking. Too blue-collar for her daughter's husband's mother. The thought of being relegated to a place on her recommendation felt like another twist of the knife. I can't afford a retirement community, I said, not after what I invested here. That's not really our problem, is it? Vanessa said, checking her watch. The turkey's probably burning, by the way. I stood up mechanically and returned to the kitchen. As I basted the turkey, my hands were shaking so badly I splashed hot drippings onto my wrist. The pain barely registered. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Later, we sat around the table eating the Christmas dinner I'd prepared. Sophie chatted excitedly about her presents, oblivious to the tension. I could barely swallow past the lump in my throat. Vanessa's parents, Patricia and Donald, joined us, discussing their recent cruise as if nothing was wrong. "Grandma Ellie, aren't you hungry?" Sophie asked, noticing my full plate. "Just saving room for dessert, sweetheart," I managed to say. "Speaking of which," Patricia interjected, "Vanessa tells me you're moving out soon, Eleanor. That's probably for the best. Young families need their space, don't they?" I looked up to see her smug expression. She knew. They'd all known about this plan, had probably discussed it in detail, everyone except me. After dinner, while I was loading the dishwasher, James approached me again. "Mom, I've been thinking, it might be better if you left tonight instead of waiting until New Year's." I froze, a gravy-stained plate in my hand. "Tonight? On Christmas?" "It's just, Vanessa's pretty stressed about the pregnancy. Having you here, knowing you're upset, it's not good for her or the baby." "James, it's snowing outside. It's Christmas night. Where would I even go?" He pulled out his phone. I checked. "The Riverside Inn has vacancies. I can book you a week there to give you time to figure things out." In that moment, I realized my son, the little boy I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when James was just 3, was a stranger to me now. Whatever values I thought I'd instilled in him had been buried beneath layers of entitlement and cold practicality. "Fine," I said finally, setting down the plate before I broke it. "I'll go pack." I moved through the guest room, my room, in a daze, grabbing clothes and toiletries. What do you pack when your life is being uprooted without warning? What matters when the person you sacrificed everything for decides you're disposable? As I was zipping up my suitcase, my eyes fell on the small safe I kept in the closet. Inside was something James didn't know about, something I'd never mentioned because I never imagined I'd need it. The deed to the house, the real deed, showing me as the primary owner, with James as a contingent beneficiary. When we'd purchased the house, I'd suggested putting it in both our names, since I was contributing so much to the down payment. James insisted it should be in his and Vanessa's names only. For tax purposes, he claimed. What he didn't know was that Dr. Howard Greenfield, my former boss and mentor at Northside General Hospital, had insisted on reviewing the paperwork before I signed. Howard, who'd been like a father to me over my 40-year nursing career, had immediately spotted the issue. "Ellie, this agreement gives you no protection," he'd said. "You're essentially gifting them a small fortune with nothing to show for it." Howard had his attorney draw up a different agreement, one that protected my investment by making me the primary deed holder, with a provision that ownership would transfer fully to James after 20 years or upon my death, whichever came later. James had signed it without reading the fine print, too eager to get the keys to his dream home. I never told him. I wanted to trust my son. I wanted to believe I'd never need legal protection from my own child. But Howard, who'd seen too many elderly parents taken advantage of by their children, had insisted. "Just in case," he'd said. "You never know what might happen." Now, as I pulled the document from the safe, My hands trembled with a mixture of emotions. Relief that I wasn't completely vulnerable. Heartbreak that I needed this protection at all. And, I'm ashamed to admit, a small, growing spark of anger. I tucked the deed into my purse and finished packing. When I emerged, James was waiting impatiently by the front door, car keys in hand. "I'll drive you to the hotel," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I can drive myself," I replied. "My car's in the driveway." "Actually," he hesitated, "Vanessa and I were thinking maybe you could sell your car to have some extra cash for the retirement community. Her brother needs a reliable vehicle and—" No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. "The car stays with me." The drive to the Riverside Inn was silent and tense. Snow fell heavily, accumulating on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Christmas lights blurred through my tears as we passed house after house where families were together, celebrating, loving each other. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As James pulled up to the hotel entrance, I suddenly turned to him. "Why are you doing this? What did I do wrong?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his childhood self that it made my heart ache. "It's not about what you did wrong, Mom. It's about our family needing space to grow. Vanessa feels like you're always watching, judging her parenting. I've never once criticized how she parents Sophie. It's not what you say, it's how you look at her. Anyway," he checked his watch, "they're expecting me back for dessert with Sophie. The room's already paid for, a week like I promised. That should be enough time to sort something out." I got out without another word, pulling my suitcase from the back seat. As I watched his car drive away, the Christmas wreath hanging from my purse, a small gift from Sophie that I hadn't had the heart to leave behind, seemed to mock the entire concept of holiday spirit. The hotel room was clean, but impersonal. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my Christmas sweater, and finally let the tears come. For hours, I cried. For the decades of sacrifice that had led to this moment, for the son I thought I knew, for the uncertain future ahead of me. When the tears finally stopped, I pulled out my phone and stared at the wallpaper. A photo of James, Vanessa, Sophie, and me from last summer's vacation. We looked happy. Had it all been an illusion? I opened my contacts and scrolled to Ruth Holloway, my former neighbor and one of the few friends I'd managed to keep despite my grueling schedule as a nurse. Ruth had retired a few years before me from teaching at the local high school. We'd bonded over being single mothers who put everything into our careers and children. Despite the late hour and the holiday, she answered on the second ring. "Ellie? What's wrong?" She knew me well enough to hear the distress in my simple hello. "James kicked me out," I said, the words still feeling surreal. "Tonight, on Christmas." "He did what?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Where are you now?" "The Riverside Inn. He's paid for a week." "Oh, how generous of him." Ruth's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Stay there tonight, but tomorrow you're coming. To my place. I have a spare room, and I've been wanting a roommate anyway. This house is too big for just me." "Ruth, I can't impose—" "It's not imposing when it's family, and you're more family to me than most of my blood relatives. Now tell me everything." As I recounted the events of the evening, Ruth listened without interrupting. When I mentioned the deed, she let out a low whistle. "Howard was a smart man," she said finally. "So what are you going to do?" I touched the document in my purse. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to march back there tomorrow and throw them all out, but that's not who you are," Ruth finished for me. "At least, not who you've been. The question is, who do you need to be now, Ellie? Because the woman who puts everyone else first got her heart broken tonight." Her words hung in the air between us. Who did I need to be now? The loving mother who forgave everything? The rightful homeowner asserting her legal claim? The abandoned parent fighting for what she deserved? I need time to think, I said finally. Take all the time you need at my place. No pressure, no timelines. After we hung up, I sat in the silent room, listening to the distant sounds of holiday celebrations from other rooms. For 34 years, I'd defined myself as James's mother. I'd worked extra shifts to pay for his braces, his sports equipment, his college education. I'd postponed dating, travel, my own dreams, all to ensure he had everything he needed. Now, at 62, I had to redefine myself. And as the first hints of dawn broke through the curtains, I realized that process would begin with standing up for myself in a way I never had before. I may have been kicked out on Christmas Day, but I had a secret deed to my son's house. And while I'd always taught James that family came first, it was time for him to learn another lesson. Actions have consequences. Just before falling into an exhausted sleep, I reached for my phone and sent a text to Diana Mendez, a property attorney I'd met through Howard before he passed. It was brief and to the point. Need to discuss a property deed urgently. Are you available tomorrow? Her response came almost immediately, despite the holiday. For you, Ellie, always. 10 a.m. at my office? I confirmed the appointment and closed my eyes, knowing that when I woke up, I would be starting a journey I never expected to take, one that would either mend my relationship with my son or end it completely. Either way, I would no longer be the woman who was kicked out on Christmas Day. I would be Eleanor Mitchell, reclaiming her power, her home, and her life. The morning after Christmas dawned gray and cold. I woke to the unfamiliar ceiling of the Riverside Inn, momentarily confused until the events of the previous night came rushing back. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. Packed breakfast. Coming to get you at 9. No arguments. I smiled despite everything. Ruth had always been like that, direct, determined, and fiercely loyal. We'd met 15 years ago when I moved into the apartment complex where she lived. Both of us were single mothers working demanding jobs, and we'd quickly formed a bond over late-night cups of tea and shared childcare emergencies. I showered and dressed mechanically, putting on the one decent outfit I'd managed to grab during my hasty packing. The rest of my clothes were still in James's house, my house according to the deed safely tucked in my purse. The weight of that document felt both reassuring and terrifying. It represented power I'd never intended to use. Ruth arrived precisely at 9, bustling into my hotel room with a thermos of coffee and a bag of still warm muffins. You look terrible, she announced without preamble. Good morning to you too, I replied, attempting a smile. Drink this. She handed me the coffee. Then we're going to see that lawyer friend of yours, and after that, you're coming home with me. No detours, no second thoughts, no calling James to try to fix things. I have an appointment with Diana at 10. Good. I'm driving you there. Ruth had always been the voice of reason when I was too soft, too forgiving. While I'd spent years making excuses for James's increasingly self-centered behavior, she'd seen the pattern forming long before I was willing to acknowledge it. In the car, as the windshield wipers pushed away the remnants of last night's snow, Ruth asked the question I'd been avoiding. What do you want out of this, Ellie? Really want? I stared out the window at the holiday decorations that now seemed hollow and performative. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to forgive and forget, to find another place to live, and maintain some kind of relationship with James and Sophie. And the other part? The other part wants to show him there are consequences to treating people like disposable napkins. Ruth nodded approvingly. That's the part I want to hear more from. Diana Mendez's office was one of the few open on the day after Christmas. When Howard had first introduced us 3 years ago, I'd been struck by her no-nonsense efficiency. At 45, she'd already built a reputation as one of the most respected property attorneys in Riverside Heights. Her handshake was firm, her expression warm but professional as she ushered Ruth and me into her office. "Ellie, it's good to see you, though I'm sorry about the circumstances." She glanced at Ruth questioningly. "This is Ruth Holloway, my closest friend," I explained. "She knows everything." Diana nodded and gestured for us to sit. "Tell me what's happened." I recounted the events of Christmas evening, keeping my voice as steady as possible. When I finished, I removed the deed from my purse and placed it on her desk. "Howard had you draw this up 5 years ago. James doesn't know I'm the primary owner." Diana examined the document, nodding slowly. "Howard always was thorough. This is ironclad, Ellie. The house is legally yours, with James as a contingent. Beneficiary only. You have every right to reclaim it." "What exactly does that mean? Could I actually evict my own son?" Diana leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "Legally speaking, yes. James and Vanessa have been living there with your permission. You could revoke that permission and require them to vacate the property." The thought made my stomach churn. Evict my own child? The boy I'd raised alone? The young man whose graduation had been the proudest day of my life? "There are other options," Diana continued, sensing my discomfort. "You could negotiate a formal rental agreement. You could request they buy out your interest in the property at current market value. Or you could maintain the status quo but ensure they understand the actual ownership structure." "Which would give her leverage without making her homeless," Ruth interjected. Diana nodded. "Exactly." "How much is the house worth now?" I asked quietly. Diana pulled up a real estate website on her computer. "Based on recent sales in that neighborhood and the improvements James has made, I'd estimate around $650,000. The number hung in the air between us. My $120,000 investment had more, then doubled in value, based solely on the real estate market. "So if James wanted to buy me out," I began, "you'd be entitled to at least $240,000, possibly more depending on how we structured the agreement." $240,000. Enough to secure my future, to find a nice place of my own, to never have to worry about ending up dependent on anyone again. "He doesn't have that kind of money," I said. "Not liquid, anyway." "They could get a mortgage," Ruth pointed out. "That's what most people do when they buy houses." The irony wasn't lost on me. James worked as a financial advisor, helping other people manage their money while apparently forgetting every lesson I'd taught him about treating people with dignity and respect. "I need time to think," I said finally. Diana handed me a folder. "These are your options, outlined formally. Review them, and we can talk again in a few days. Whatever you decide, Ellie, remember this. You did nothing wrong. You're not the villain for protecting your interests." As we left Diana's office, Ruth linked her arm through mine. "How about lunch? You barely touched those muffins." The Copper Kettle Cafe was one of the few places open. The post-Christmas lull meant we had our pick of tables, and we settled into a quiet corner booth. I ordered soup more out of habit than hunger. "You're thinking too hard," Ruth said, watching me stir my soup without eating it. I can practically hear the gears grinding. "I'm trying to imagine what happens after. If I assert my rights to the house, do I lose my son forever? If I don't, am I teaching him it's okay to treat me this way?" "You already lost the son you thought you had," Ruth said gently. "The James who kicked his mother out on Christmas Day isn't the boy you raised." Her words struck me with unexpected force. The James I thought I knew. The sensitive child who'd once spent his allowance on a Mother's Day gift. The teenager who'd defended me when his friends made comments about my worn-out nursing shoes. The young man who'd tearfully thanked me at his college graduation. That James seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Maybe Vanessa changed him," I suggested half-heartedly. Ruth shook her head. "People don't change that fundamentally because of a spouse. They reveal who they always had the capacity to become. The question is, who are you going to become in response? Before I could answer, the cafe door opened, and Patricia Walker stepped in. Vanessa's mother spotted me immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to something like triumph. "Eleanor," she said, approaching our table with exaggerated concern. "I heard about what happened. Such a shame when families can't work things out during the holidays." I felt Ruth stiffen beside me. "Hello, Patricia," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "This is my friend Ruth." Patricia barely acknowledged Ruth with a nod. "I understand you're looking for a place to stay, the Whispering Pines retirement community where my aunt lives has very reasonable rates for seniors on fixed incomes." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. In Patricia's world, I was just a retired nurse with limited means, someone to be pitied at best, looked down upon at worst. "Thank you, but I've already arranged accommodations," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Where?" "That's not really your concern, is it?" Ruth interjected. Patricia's smile tightened. "I'm only trying to help. James is worried about his mother being alone at her age. The same James who'd put me in a hotel on Christmas night was now worried about me." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Well, you can tell James that his mother is just fine," I said, reaching for my purse. "In fact, I've been consulting with my attorney this morning about some property matters that may interest him." Patricia's expression shifted. "Property matters?" I withdrew the deed from my purse and slid it across the table. "It seems there's been some confusion about who actually owns the house on Cedar Lane." Patricia scanned the document, her face paling slightly. "This must be a mistake. James said the house is in his and Vanessa's names." "James was mistaken," I said, taking back the deed. "As you can see, I'm the primary owner. I've simply allowed James and Vanessa to live there." But they've been making the mortgage payments," Patricia stammered. "On a mortgage that represents less than half the property's value, thanks to my substantial down payment," I corrected her. "A down payment that James now seems to have forgotten about, along with basic human decency." Patricia's shock quickly hardened into something uglier. "So you're going to hold this over their heads? Use it to force your way back into their home? That's manipulative, Eleanor." I felt something shift inside me, a lifetime of accommodating. Others, of putting myself last, finally giving way to a steel core I hadn't known I possessed. "No, Patricia. Manipulation is convincing an elderly parent to invest her life savings in your home and then throwing her out on Christmas. What I'm doing is simply standing up for myself." I stood, leaving my soup untouched. "Please let James know I'll be in touch through my attorney. I believe Diana Mendez's card is also in that folder. She'll be handling all communications going forward." Ruth followed me out, waiting until we were in the car to let out a whoop of triumph. "Did you see her face? I thought Patricia was going to swallow her pearl necklace whole." Despite everything, I laughed, a rusty sound I barely recognized as my own. When was the last time I'd laughed freely, without worrying about pleasing others or keeping the peace? That felt— I searched for the right word. "Empowering?" Ruth suggested. "Terrifying," I corrected her. "But also right." As Ruth drove us to her house, I felt the knot that had been tightening in my chest since last night begin to loosen slightly. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't at the mercy of a son who'd forgotten what it meant to be family. Ruth's house was a cozy two-bedroom, craftsman on a quiet street lined with oak trees. I'd visited many times over the years, but never as someone seeking refuge. "The spare room is all made up," she said, carrying my suitcase inside. "I put fresh towels in the bathroom and cleared out half the closet. Stay as long as you need." "Ruth, I can't thank you enough." She waved away my gratitude. "You'd do the same for me. Now I'm making tea and we're going to map out a strategy." As Ruth busied herself in the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text from James. I just got a call from Patricia. What are you doing, Mom? This isn't like you. The message stung with its familiar accusation that standing up for myself was somehow out of character, inappropriate, wrong. And perhaps it was unlike the Ellie Mitchell who had always put others first, who had smiled through James's increasingly selfish behaviors, who had rationalized his dismissive treatment as just his way. But that Ellie had spent Christmas night in a hotel room. I typed back simply, I'm doing what I should have done years ago. Diana Mendez will be in touch about the house. His response was immediate. You're really going to sue your own son? Over a misunderstanding? Misunderstanding. As if kicking me out on Christmas had been a simple communication error. I showed the text to Ruth when she returned with the T. Block him, she advised. All communication through Diana, just like you told Patricia. The moment you engage directly, he'll try to manipulate you with guilt and emotional appeals. He's still my son, I said weakly. And you're still his mother. But that didn't stop him from throwing you out like yesterday's trash. Block him, Ellie. At least for now. With trembling fingers, I did as she suggested, feeling both terrible and relieved as I confirmed the blocking. For the first time in 34 years, I was intentionally cutting off communication with my son. Now what? I asked, cradling the warm tea mug between my hands. Now we make a plan for your future that doesn't revolve around James. Over the next several hours, Ruth and I talked through my options. My nursing pension would cover basic expenses, but not much more. The potential buyout from the house would provide security, but I needed to decide what I really wanted. If money weren't an issue, Ruth asked, what would you do? Where would you live? I closed my eyes, allowing myself to envision a future, untethered from obligations and others' expectations. I'd find a small place with good light for painting. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. Painting? Since when do you paint? I felt my cheeks flush. I used to, years ago, before James was born. I've sketched a bit over the years, but never had the time or space to really pursue it. What else? I'd volunteer at the hospitals. Pediatric ward. Not as a nurse, but as a reader or a companion. I always wanted to do that after retirement, but when James suggested I move in to help with Sophie, Ruth nodded, understanding. You put your plans on hold. Again. I'd take that cooking class at the community center, I continued, warming to the exercise. The one focused on international cuisines, and maybe join that hiking group for seniors. So you have a life waiting for you, Ruth said with satisfaction. A life that has nothing to do with being James's convenient childcare provider. Put that way, it sounded so simple. But decades of putting my son first had created deep grooves in my thinking, pathways of guilt and obligation that wouldn't be easily redirected. What if I'm overreacting? I asked. Maybe I should call him, try to work things out. Ruth set down her mug with a decisive click. Ellie Mitchell, listen to me. You are not overreacting. You were kicked out of your own house on Christmas, day after investing a small fortune in it. You have legal recourse, financial leverage, and a friend who's telling you it's time to put yourself first for once. The only question is whether you're brave enough to do it. Was I brave enough? The answer to that question would determine everything that followed. My phone buzzed again, an email this time from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, regarding Eleanor Mitchell and the Cedar Lane property. With a growing sense of unease, I opened it to find a message from Tyler Jenkins, James's friend and colleague. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, I hope this message finds you well, despite the difficult circumstances. James asked me to reach out as an objective third party. He believes there's been a misunderstanding about the house ownership that could be resolved amicably, without involving attorneys. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow to discuss? Regards, Tyler Jenkins, CFP R. I showed the email to Ruth, who snorted derisively. Objective third party? Please. He's James's drinking buddy and works under him at the firm. He's about as objective as Vanessa would be. How should I respond? You shouldn't. Forward it to Diana and let her handle it. That's what you're paying her for. I did as Ruth suggested, adding a note asking Diana if she thought meeting with Tyler would be worthwhile. Her response came within the hour. Ellie, I strongly advise against any meeting without legal representation. Based on my experience, this is likely an attempt to pressure you into a less favorable arrangement. I've taken the liberty of responding to Mr. Jenkins, informing him that all communications should be directed to me. I've also contacted a professional appraiser to assess the current market value of the property to strengthen our negotiating position. We'll speak soon. Diana. The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo. I unpacked my meager belongings in Ruth's spare room, trying to make it feel like something more than a temporary shelter. Ruth insisted on cooking dinner, a gesture so kind it nearly brought me to tears again. And we watched old movies until late, deliberately avoiding further discussion of James or the house. That night, as I lay in an unfamiliar bed staring at shadows on an unfamiliar ceiling, I allowed myself to really feel the pain of James's betrayal. Not just the Christmas eviction, but the years of subtle dismissals, of taking my sacrifices for granted, of treating me as a resource rather than a person. When had it started? Maybe in his late teens, when his athletic achievements and academic honors had shifted his perception of himself in relation to me. Maybe in college, when he'd begun moving in social circles where family wealth and connections mattered more than character. Or maybe when he'd met Vanessa, whose family viewed status and financial success as the ultimate measures of worth. Whenever it had begun, it had culminated in that terrible moment in the dining room, when my son had looked at me not as the mother who'd given him everything, but as an inconvenience to be managed. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would not allow that moment to define the rest of my life. I would use the legal advantage I had, the deed Howard had insisted on, not primarily for revenge, but for restoration. Not to punish James, but to ensure I could build a future where I would never again be vulnerable to such casual cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. James's attorney contacted me this morning. They're requesting a meeting tomorrow, at 3 p.m. I recommend we accept. James had hired an attorney already. The knowledge should have hurt, but instead it cemented my resolve. This was no longer about a mother and son disagreement. It was a legal battle over property rights. And, for once, I had the stronger position. I texted back my agreement to the meeting, then set my phone aside and went to find Ruth. She was already in the kitchen, making coffee and toast. I heard you moving around early, she said, sliding a mug toward me. Rough night? Clarifying,